We want to do one more activity, and that is to spend time on the next 30 minutes with Pastor Stoterau and just share with us about the district and our mission here. And for the children, we have an activity for the kids out in the lobby. There, the teens and our kids can go if you like to do a little craft at this time, as we, or you're welcome to stay here as well. So, we've been really blessed. Let's begin with Linda Stoterau over here. Let's welcome her. It's great to have her with us. She just retired from the school district. They started in California. Actually, Larry is celebrating his 40th year in the ministry. And so at the pastor's conference last week, they had a big celebration for him and powerful testimony of love with your sons and with your wife. And so he started back in Alhambra, California. Anybody know Alhambra? All right, some of you Californians. Then he was brought here to Chandler, Epiphany Lutheran, for over 18 years, and then was nominated, elected to be our district president. The district president is a full-time job because he's got to keep track of all his pastors and just over 300 congregations. But he'll show you a little bit more. Let's welcome President Larry Stoterau.
Thank you very much. It's certainly a joy for Linda and me to be with you tonight to kind of relive the history with you of the 40 years. You started in 1973, as makes sense then, that's when I became a pastor. And we came to Alhambra, California at that time. So it's wonderful to be with you and to bring greetings to you from your brothers and sisters in Christ throughout the Pacific Southwest District of the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod. The Pacific Southwest District, as Pastor Blau said, is 310 congregations and 183 schools. Preschools and daycare like yours, elementary schools and high schools throughout Southern California, all of Arizona, and Southern Nevada. And so as we travel around the district, it's just amazing to see what God is doing and how He's blessing the ministry. And one of the things that we see as we travel around is our German ancestors came to southern Missouri, Perry County, just south of St. Louis, and started the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod in 1847, and they were all German speakers. And so for many years, if you went to a Missouri Synod church, it was a German church. And it was only really after World War I, and especially after World War II, the German language got dropped and we went to English. But as we travel around our district today, of those 310 churches that are part of our district, 80 of them tomorrow will have at least one worship service in a non-English language. And so today it's not German, but it is Spanish, it is Chinese, it is Amharic and Oromo, which are from Ethiopia, from Africa. It is Korean, it is Cambodian and Vietnamese. It is just amazing to see how immigrants who come to the United States and come to our part of the world are now able to be part of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and to have worship in their language. And just like in the German church, as they began to have children and grandchildren, the children and the grandchildren especially didn't remember the German anymore, and so they would worship in English. And that's what we see too with immigrants coming today, that while first generation still want to worship in Spanish or in an African language, their children are looking more to worship in English, and so those transitions take place. But Pastor Tim asked me to tell you a little bit about what's happening in the Synod today. Our national church body is 6,100 congregations scattered across the United States and a few of them in southern Canada, about 2.2 million members. But many of those churches are not as exciting as yours for a number of reasons. Because of who you are and your personality, but also, as I'm going to show you a little bit, the bad news. And the bad news is that over 80% of all churches in the Lutheran Church today are plateaued and declining, and not growing and exciting like yours. Let me just show you a little bit about that. We need to turn the lights off again for this to show up. No. Doesn't want to works. We'll look this way. The church in the United States of America today. Did you know that the United States of America is the third largest mission field in the world? In other words, there are more unbelievers in the United States than in every other country of the world except China and India, which are over 1 billion people. So that we have a big job to continue to do to reach out with the gospel. Well, if we want to put that in a negative, rather than saying that the United States is the third largest mission field of the world, we could also say the United States is the third largest pagan country in the world. And then we wonder why we deal with some of the issues that we do today. So we've got a big job ahead of us. 18.7% of the population in the United States goes to a Christian church on any given Sunday. 18.7%. Now in California and Arizona, it's 17%. So on any given Sunday, 17% of the population is in a Christian church. The average church size, not just Lutheran size, the average church size of Christian churches in the United States today is 75 people in worship. So you're way above average. And you think about that, and you think about all the big mega churches that there are, and you see all the stories about those big mega churches, and you've got a couple of them up here in the area. But when you put all the Christian churches together, the average is 75. 90% of all Lutheran churches are plateaued and declining. I said 80, but it's really closer to 90% of all Lutheran churches, not just Missouri Synod, but Lutheran churches are plateaued and declining in the United States today. 50 Christian congregations close in the United States each week. As they plateau and decline to the point that they can't stay alive, they eventually close. But of all the Christian churches, about 50 of them a week are closing. 5%. You're part of the 5%. These are statistics about the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And in 2011, which was the last statistics we had at the time this was done, half of all adult baptisms and confirmations occurred in 5% of the Missouri Synod churches. In other words, 5% of the churches really get it, and they're doing a wonderful job, and half of the adults who came into the church came through 5%. Now these, I know it's too small for you to see, but let me just give you some quick numbers here to talk about what's happening with Christianity in the United States today. And this says the biggest losers, and these are the denominations who had the biggest losses from 1990 to 2000. And here are some of them. United Methodist Church declined by 6.7%. Presbyterian Church USA by 11.6%. United Church of Christ by 14.8%. The Episcopal Church by 5.3%. The ELCA by 2.2%. The American Baptist Church by 5.7%. Lutheran Church Missouri Synod by 3.2%. National Association of Free Will Baptists, the Mennonites, the Reformed Church in America. All those churches from 1990 to 2000 were declining nationally. Well, what happened between 2000 and 2009? United Methodist Church declined by 24%. Presbyterian Church USA, 9.4%. United Church of Christ, 34.6%. Episcopal Church, 11.1%. ELCA by 9.3%. American Baptist Church, not the Southern Baptist, but the American Baptist Church, 24.7%. Lutheran Church Missouri Synod by 7.3%. Mennonite Church by 29%. Reformed Church in America by 25%. So you see that those churches, those denominations in the United States continue to decline rather dramatically. So who's growing? What churches are growing in the United States? Catholic Church by 16.2%. Almost all of it is immigration growth. It's not that the Catholic Church are bringing in a lot of new people, but it's people who are immigrating to the United States from Asia,
as well as Central and South America for their growth. This is 1990 to 2000. Southern Baptists grew by 5%. The Mormons grew by 19%. The Assembly of God by 18%. But here's the surprising one. From 1990 to 2000, the Salvation Army, which is a Christian church, the Salvation Army grew by 225%. More than doubled in size from 1990 to 2000. Well, from 2000 to 2009, Catholic Church continues to grow by immigration, 9.8%, Southern Baptists by 1%, the Mormons by 41%, Assembly of God by 13%. And so you see that the churches that are growing are not all Christian churches, but the churches that are growing are basically the very, very conservative Pentecostal type churches. We have a shift, and you are a church that is doing this very well. And other churches need to learn from you. Because the missional shift is from being an internally focused church to being an externally focused church. From a program development to people development. From church-based to kingdom-based leadership. Let me show you what I mean by that. And I say, you're a church that demonstrates this in some wonderful ways, and I can't thank you enough for what you're doing in your community. We're moving from attractional evangelism to incarnational evangelism. God came to earth for us. We couldn't get to heaven, so God came to us in sending Jesus, his own Son, into our world. We call that the incarnation. God coming to us. So too in the church today, we need to be thinking much more about not how do we attract people to our church, but how does the church get in the community, and in some of the ways that you do it very well. 40 years ago, when the church started here, it was built here, and in 40 years ago, we could put up a sign, we could advertise in the newspaper, we could let people know there was a new Lutheran church in town, and Lutherans in the community would come looking for the church. That's not what happens today. Attractional evangelism is what happened 40 years ago. And attractional evangelism is we publish our worship times to let people know when it was so they could come. The problem today is people don't know why they should go to church. Many people today don't even know why you're here. Attractional evangelism is we invite your neighbors to church, which is always helpful and important to do. But the frustration is that we can invite our neighbors, but they don't come. And sometimes we have to invite our neighbors for years before they finally come. Your school is attractional evangelism, and it is excellent. Our schools are one of the strongest things that we do in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod in bringing people to the church, in reaching out with the gospel of Jesus Christ. But incarnational evangelism is when the church gets into the community, when the church takes an active role in what's happening in the community, like you do, like you did after the Yarnell fires, like you do with your angel tree, like you do as you find ways to get involved in the community. Incarnational evangelism is when the pastor spends time in the community, as your pastor does. I keep telling our pastors that they should start writing their sermons at Starbucks rather than in their office. And they may find their sermons take a little different character if they're writing them sitting in Starbucks, watching the people who come, rather than sitting in their office. So one of my pastors took me up on that. And he did. He said, Larry, I went down to Starbucks and I spent my afternoon writing my sermon. And one of the elders came by the church and asked the secretary why I wasn't in the office. And the secretary said, he's down at Starbucks. And for the first hour of the next elders meeting, they talked about why the pastor shouldn't be at Starbucks. You see, we want to encourage our pastors to be out in the community. We want to encourage them to be known as you do. Incarnational evangelism says, what are the needs that need to be done in this community that we can do? How can we reach out? And again, you are a great example of exactly what we're talking about. Externally focused church. I'm going to move ahead because you don't want to listen to all this. I want to talk about a church life cycle. Because every church goes through church life cycles. And you, as Pastor Tim and I have been talking, you are a church that is approaching a dangerous age. 40 years old. You know, think about our own physical bodies. That our own physical bodies, when we're born, we grow very fast. And when we haven't seen our grandchildren for a while, we just are amazed at how much they've grown since we saw them the last time. Because when we're very young, we grow very fast. And 40 years ago, when this church was young, it grew rather steadily because it was reaching out into the community and inviting the people to come. And so in our physical body, we grow, and then we get into those teenage years when we aren't growing quite so much physically, but we're beginning to mature, hopefully, and we're beginning to experience and explore. And then we get to that point where we're in our late 20s, early 30s, and hopefully by then we've got a decent job and we're raising a family and we're kind of getting settled in. And then we get to the middle years, like 40 and 50 years old, and now we're beginning to see in our families, we're approaching empty nest, and our kids are now going out on their own and becoming more independent. And then we reach what some people used to call the golden years. As I'm approaching those years, they're more like the rust years. But we begin to realize that our body is not as strong as it used to be and begins to fail. We don't recover as fast as we used to when we get sick, and we have all those things. And eventually we know that this body dies. But when this body dies, we know that we're going to be reborn. We're going to get a new life cycle that isn't going to end, and that's that life cycle that we call eternity with Jesus. But in organizations also grow rather quickly when they're young. However, as an organization gets older, that organization has to continually recreate itself. It has to continually find new ways to give new birth to the organization, or the organization begins to decline and you lose business. Examples. IBM believed there was no future in laptop computers. And along comes that upstart Apple, and pretty soon IBM realized that if they were going to stay viable in the computer business, they'd better look at laptop computers. Look at car manufacturers. Notice that every car manufacturer, about every 3, 4, 5 years, comes out with a new model or a revised model, so that we keep looking for new cars and what they're offering. So the churches have to have multiple life cycles. I mean, we need to think about, how does a church get reborn? I'm going to use as an example a church in St. Louis. This church was the founding church of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Old historic Trinity, right down by Anheuser-Busch Brewery. I think they came to St. Louis about the same time. Old historic Trinity was the church pastored by C.F.W. Walther, the first president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. That church still exists today, over 160 years old. The only reason it still exists today is because it kept creating new life cycles. It was a German church, and it served German immigrants. And as German immigrants came to St. Louis, it grew very fast. Then it realized that they weren't German anymore, or at least they weren't speaking German anymore. So the first life cycle that really happened for them is they then added English to their worship. Now they have German worship and they have English worship to try to meet the needs of that community. It's a new life cycle. It gave them a new start. And through the years, they've had to periodically say, what do we need to do differently? Not necessarily get rid of something, but what do we have to do differently to have a new life cycle? Most recently, in 2010, they realized that the neighborhood around them was very rapidly growing up with old warehouses being turned into condominiums called lofts. And moving into those new condominiums were young, upcoming couples and families who were just getting started in their career. And so the church realized that they needed a new life cycle to try to reach out to their new community. So in 2010, they called a young pastor and his wife from the seminary, a new graduate, and they moved them into one of those buildings, into one of those condominium buildings, because that was the only way you could get into them, was if you lived there. And so now they have a whole new ministry over these last 3 years, reaching out to these young families who are living in these condominiums downtown. And so life cycles become always the question. If a church, by the time it's 40 years old, has not created at least one new life cycle, they are starting to decline. Now you are doing that. You created a new life cycle back in the 1990s when you started your preschool and extended care program. That was a new life cycle. You look at other new life cycles. You really, in a way, created a new life cycle when you went to multiple worship services, because that reached out to other people that you weren't reaching before. And so part of the challenge now, as you look ahead to the next 40 years, is to ask the question, what's our next new life cycle? What's our next new ministry in this community that's going to help us reach beyond who we are? It's real easy at 40 years of age to become complacent, because you've got a good worshiping community, because things are going well, because you're pretty solid financially, because you're excited now about looking at the building of a new sanctuary. And so it's very easy to kind of sit back and say, isn't this wonderful what God has done? But the real question becomes, what's our next new life cycle? Is the next new life cycle reaching out to another language? Is our next new life cycle reaching out to a group of people in the community that we're not reaching right now? I don't know, because I don't know your community that well. But to begin to ask that question, what's going to keep us going? The largest church in our district, is 130 years old. And it's the largest. Worships almost 2,000 people on a Sunday morning. And the only reason they're still that size is because they've created multiple life cycles through those years that have given them opportunity to reach out to new people. I'm going to close with this picture of a map. I said the Pacific Southwest District is 310 congregations, 183 schools, Southern California, all of Arizona, Southern Nevada. You can see it's kind of a funny looking shape. Along the coast, along the Pacific Ocean, we go as far as Goleta and Santa Ynez, Santa Barbara area. In the central part of California, if you know California, we go up Interstate 5 only to the top of the Grapevine. So Bakersfield is not in our district. But on the east side of California, we go all the way up to Mammoth. This was drawn in 1930. In 1930, there were no Missouri Synod churches in Arizona or Southern Nevada. The first Missouri Synod church in Arizona, 1939. Anybody know where? Yuma. Believe it or not, the first Missouri Synod church in Arizona was in Yuma in 1939. So we were known for many years as the Southern California district because that's all we were. In 1988, we changed the name to the Pacific Southwest District because of all the many churches that have grown up in Arizona and the many churches in Southern Nevada, basically the Las Vegas area. But in 1930, that's where the railroads ran. And so that's where the boundaries were drawn in California. And the other part of it is, you can't get from the west side of the Sierras to the east side of the Sierras about 4 months out of the year because the mountain passes are closed. But you can always go up Highway 395 on the east side. So that's who we are. You're one of those churches, and we praise God for you. You're one of those churches, and we thank you for your mission heart and for all that you're doing in your community, and continue to celebrate that with you. And we look forward to worship with you tomorrow. And I have one last thing I'd like to, if you turn the lights on, please. Some of you, I don't know if you even know it, but after the Yarnell fire, Pastor Tim put a little announcement in our e-news letting people in our district know that if they would like to help support some of the things you were doing to reach out into the Yarnell area, to the firefighters and to their families, firefighters who lost their lives and their families, the congregations could contribute to that. And so I'd like to give you a check today, Tim. I wish it was bigger, but this is a check for about $550 that came from some of the other churches in our district who sent funds in to help support the work that you're doing here. And you use it in relief of the people at Yarnell in whatever way you think, whether it's for the comfort dogs or however you want to use it. But this is from some of your brothers and sisters.
In fact, I just got a call this past week from one of our Lutheran brother churches in Phoenix, Christ Lutheran, in Phoenix, and they want to team up with us to go to Yarnell the first Saturday in December to do yard work, to just help with some of the families out there. And so we'll use it for Christmas gifts as well for kids. And so we'll give half of this to the Thurston family and their boys that go here. We'll give that to her. And the other half, we'll use that for Christmas gifts and supplies to the Yarnell families on the December 7th. So keep that in mind, December 7th, if you want to join us to go there.